Okay, let's dive into a topic that sounds complicated, but is actually running in the background of our lives every single day. Canadian public law. The best way to think about it is like an invisible operating system for the entire country. And for this tour, we're going to use this textbook as our guide to really break down that complex code and give you a clear roadmap. So, to get us started, I want you to just mull over this one big question. Who makes the rules for the rule makers? I mean, we all know governments make laws, but what's to stop them from just doing whatever they want? Answering that question, well, that's the key that unlocks this entire world of public law. All right, so let's start our tour with the most fundamental building block, because before we can get into how the system works, we got to know what we're even talking about. So, what is public law anyway? At its heart, it's pretty simple. Public law is basically the rulebook for power. It sets out how the government can interact with you. You know, things like criminal law or your constitutional rights. But, and this is just as crucial, it also sets the rules for how the different parts of the government have to deal with each other. And this is where it gets really clear. You're probably way more familiar with what's called private law, right? That's when you have a fight with your neighbor over a property line or a dispute with a company over a bad contract. It's you versus someone else. Public law, totally different game. The state is always on one side of the equation. It's the big framework for how we all live together as a country. Okay, so we've got our definition down. Now let's pop the hood and see what makes this thing run. We're going to dig into the foundational rules. Think of this as looking at the actual source code of Canada's operating system. Exactly. This whole complicated machine of government, it's not just floating out there in space. It's built on a solid bedrock of ideas, of history, and core principles that give the whole thing its shape and its strength. And these are basically the four main pillars of that bedrock. If you really want to get public law, you have to look at where it comes from. The big ideas in legal theory, the foundational laws in relationship with Indigenous peoples, the actual written laws and court decisions, and of course those huge overarching principles in our Constitution. Everything else stands on top of this. And who's guiding us on this journey? Well, the analysis we're digging into today comes from a whole team of top-tier legal scholars and professors from law schools all across Canada. So yeah, we're in good hands. This is the expert-level stuff just broken down for us. Okay, let's move on. We've seen the foundation, so now it's time to meet the key players, the main institutions that are actually running around on this field. First up, the obvious one, Parliament. This is the legislative branch. Pretty straightforward, they're the primary lawmakers. Their whole job is to debate and pass the laws that govern all of us. Next, you've got the executive. The easiest way to think of this is the government that's in power right now. So the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the whole machinery of the public service, they are the law doers. They're the ones who have to take the laws Parliament passes and actually put them into action. And finally, our third key player, the courts. We're talking about the entire judiciary, from your local provincial court all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. They are the official law interpreters. Their job is to figure out what the law actually means when it gets applied to messy, real-life situations. So we have the makers, the doers, and the interpreters. But here's the thing. The real magic, the core of this whole operating system, is how these three powerful branches push and pull on one another. So let's just walk through a super quick example. Imagine Parliament passes a brand new, really complicated law. It gets royal assent, it's on the books, job done, right? Well, not quite. Because that new law immediately creates the next big question. A law is really just a bunch of words on a page, so what does it actually mean when you try to apply it to a real person in a real situation? The language can be vague, you know? And that is where the interpreters come in. The courts get the job of figuring out what Parliament meant. This whole process has a name, statutory interpretation, and it can literally change the course of history. I mean, think about the famous Persons case back in 1929. The law said only qualified persons could be in the Senate. The courts had to decide, did that word persons even include women? Their decision that it did completely redefined our society. So here's the big takeaway. That historical case shows how this constant back and forth between the players works like the system's own debugger. When Parliament writes the code, the law, the courts come along and test it. They interpret it, and they make sure it doesn't conflict with the bigger program, the Constitution. This is what we call checks and balances, and it's absolutely vital for making sure no one part of the government gets way too powerful. I know, this can all sound a little bit abstract, like something for a civics class. But honestly, understanding this framework is incredibly important for every single one of us. So why does all this matter? It matters because of this. You can't really use a new piece of software if you don't have the user's manual, right? Well, it's the exact same idea here. You can't be a truly effective citizen in a democracy if you don't understand the rules of the game. Public law is that user's manual.
Look, we started this explainer talking about a roadmap, and that's exactly what this is. Knowing this map, understanding how power is supposed to be used, who is supposed to have it, and what its limits are, that is the absolute first step to becoming an engaged and empowered citizen.
So, we've just taken a 30,000-foot view of the map of Canada's operating system. We've seen the bedrock rules, we've met the key players, and we've seen how they interact. The question I really want to leave you with is this: which part of this massive, fascinating system do you want to explore next?